All right, ladies and gentlemen, today we're going to be looking at what lesson 1.2, adding integers. Now, adding integers is one of the most important things in 7th grade and 8th grade. A lot of the times when the 8th graders are making mistakes on their tests and quizzes, it's not because of the new information, it's because it goes back to the 7th grade information here, the adding integers. So the first kind of essential question that we're talking about is, how can I predict that the sum of two integers is positive, negative, or zero? So throughout our discussion, we'll come up with some kind of guidelines to help us out. Second question, what is the difference between the opposite and the absolute value of a number? So remember, we just talked about absolute values on lesson 1.1, and maybe you already know what opposite is, so we'll talk more about that as well. And then, how do we add integers with different signs? So it's when the same integers, same sign integers, students can rock that. It's usually the different signs that students struggle with. All right, let's see if we can rock this. All right, what are integers? Again, this is kind of what we talked about yesterday. If we were in my classroom, we would see a big number line on the wall. It says whole numbers and their opposites. And then again, we can't forget about that zero. That's in that very center, the neutral number. So it's neither positive nor negative. It is neutral. So again, we got some positive and negative numbers, and the neutral's in the center. Remember, if I'm going too fast, just pause it, back it up, do what you need to do. All right, in order to add integers with the same sign is key. All you have to do is add them and keep the sign. So for example, when you first learned 2 plus 3 in little guy, little girl, elementary school, 2 cookies plus 3 cookies is 5 cookies. So again, the negative sign, the opposite idea, maybe they are both negative. Negative 2 plus negative 3, we keep the same sign, negative 5. So it's kind of like 2 poison cookies and 3 poison cookies is 5 poison cookies. Oh, that's so sad. So again, keep the same sign. It's when we have different signs that are the difficulty again. If they have the different sign, you are going to subtract instead of add. And then here's the difficult part from some students. Keep the sign of the number with the greatest absolute value. Sometimes students mistakenly call it the larger number. That's not what we're going to call it. We're going to call it the number with the greatest absolute value so that we can use our correct mathematical terminology. So we're going to go ahead and practice just a few basic problems here. So let me go ahead and get my writing ready to go. I'm using my pen tablet here. So we're going to go up here to the same sign. And again, that's like your elementary idea, 1 plus 3, and that's obviously equal to 4. But again, we're going to focus on the negative signs because that's the newer part for 7th graders. So if I have a negative 2 plus a negative 5, again, the rule is add them together, so that's a 7, and keep the same sign. So that's going to be negative 7. It doesn't matter if I have a negative 12 plus a negative 9. If they're the same sign, I'm going to add them together. So that would be a 21 and keep the same sign. So negative 21. Looking pretty good. So again, one more. Keep the same sign. So go ahead and try this one on yourself. I got a negative 7 plus a negative 5. 10, 9. So add them together, you get a 12 with a negative sign. All right, different sign. For different signs, remember that means there's one positive and one negative. So it may be presented to you like this, negative 3 plus 2. So the instructions are to subtract. So a 3 and a 2 will subtract to give me a 1. Then I think about the sign. I'm going to take the sign with the greatest absolute value. Negative 3 is the one with the greatest absolute value because that would be an absolute value of 3, which is greater than an absolute value of 2, which is 2. So in other words, my answer is going to be negative 1. All right, what if it's written like this? 4 plus negative 7. Same thing, right? subtract. So a 7 and a 4 are going to subtract. So that's elementary mental math. So I'm going to get a 3. And then I'm going to take the sign from the greatest absolute value, which again is the negative. So what about a negative 5 plus a 10? Those are opposite signs. I'm going to subtract, which gives me a 5. And 10 obviously has a greater absolute value than a negative 5, so it's going to be a positive 5. Now, you don't have to put a plus sign there. You just know it's positive 5. So I kept the same sign, though. Really key there. All right, one more, and then we'll throw in some medium level problems. Because again, these are the basic ones, practicing the rules. So let me see. Ooh, yes, let's try this. Negative 32 plus 19. So now you may even just be able to look at it and say, I know my answer is negative because negative 32 has the greater absolute value. So therefore, I'm going to start off by putting my negative sign there because surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly, a lot of 7th graders and 8th graders remember to subtract, but they forget to put the negative sign there, at least for this specific problem. So if you take care of the negative sign first, it might be easier for you. And then over here, if you have to, you would just do 32 subtract 19, elementary style. Line it up. This is the way my teacher taught me. 12 subtract 9 is 3. 2 subtract 1 is 1. So that gives me a negative 13. Beautiful. All right, now that we've practiced our basic problems, we're going to go ahead and look at some ones a little bit more challenging. Now, if you notice, there's just 3 problems here. Now, there's a few different strategies on what you can do. One thing that some students like to do is instead of looking at the whole problem, they kind of reorganize it and break it up into like 2 mini problems, if you will. So mathematically, you are allowed to work with the negative 8 and positive 8 first, and sometimes students like to reorganize them using the commutative property. You just move it around because they're commuting. Now, you really don't have to move them around. You can kind of mentally do that. Now, looking at it, don't we know that a negative 8 and a positive 8, those are really opposites? So that means when I add them together or combine them, like I like to say, doesn't that just give us a 0? And a 0 plus a negative 5 is just an answer of a negative 5. So that's one option. Another option is just being presented with the original problem, and you would say, wait a minute, I know that negative 8 and positive 8 are opposites, and based off of my number line, if I'm at negative 8 and I move to the right 8 spaces, doesn't that give me 0? So a lot of students, they just physically cross those out because it gives them a 0. And we know that 0 plus negative 5, well, the 0 really doesn't affect addition or subtraction, so it means my answer is just negative 5. So you can use that strategy if you'd like to as well. Or you can show all this beautiful work. My suggestion is the crossing them off. All right, one more like that. Let's see. Now, some people like to go ahead and reorganize it like I showed you. Others might want to just say, well, Mr. Murillo, if I just kind of say 6 plus, well, let me show you the first way. The reorganization again, 6 and 2, those are positive. So if I kind of put those together, group them together, I know that's going to be an 8. A negative 3 plus a negative 9, those have the same signs. So it means I can add them and it stays negative. So that gives me a negative 12. So I have a, I don't have to show all that again. So it's really just an 8 and a negative 12. Now, remember, they have different signs. So it means I'm going to subtract them and take the sign from the greatest absolute value. So it's 12 subtracting 8 is a 4. And then I got to take the negative sign because negative 12 has the greater absolute value, which gives me an answer of negative 4. So let me show you that other strategy. And the reason I show this is because it's really helpful, especially when we get to 8th grade math, where we have to combine a lot of like terms. So they're organized by color here. I'm actually going to organize them by shape. Oops, not laser pointer. So I'm actually going to go ahead and put a box around 6 and 2 because I consider those like terms. They're both positive, and that just gives me an 8. Now I can use another shape. I can use a triangle. I can use kind of a circle or oval one. And again, it's clearly different than the boxes. So the rule tells me again, same sign. I'm going to add them up. Gives me a 12. I'm going to keep the sign, negative 12. So I really now have 8 plus negative 12. And again, different signs. I subtract to get a 4, and I take the sign from the greatest absolute value, so negative 4. That is my preferred method. If you want to do all of the reorganization, that is definitely mathematically sound. All right, now that you have this completed, you're going to practice some on your own for your assignment. All right, be awesome. Oops, silly.